Hi, Claudia. Thanks for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Claudia. I'm 28 years old. I'm English, living in Leeds, England. I'm working as a headhunter, primarily in the public sector, and I'm also expecting a baby at the end of May.
Well, that's exciting.
It is. It's my first. Yeah, my partner and I, we're really excited. It's all going to be a very new experience. So yeah, I've just entered the third trimester. So well, you can't see it, Nathan, but I've got quite a growing bump.
Um, well, your mind must be really pretty much on the future. Whenever you think about the environment that your child will grow up in versus the one that you did, are there some things that come to your mind?
That's a good question. It was only, I think it was 2 nights ago, actually, that I was watching a couple of documentaries just about sort of the future of the planet, sort of in terms of, well, actually these documentaries just happened to be more focused on AI, and the implications of machine learning and various like technological advancements and things. But obviously, as with any future focused, future facing matters and discourses, it's always kind of inextricably linked to environmental impact and what have you. So yes, I did start to think, wow, the child's world and interaction with the earth and understanding of it and everything is just going to be so different from mine, and very different even from my partner's, who's only 10 or so years older than me. But even between him and me, things have sort of changed, and we're also saying that actually the year 2022 sounds like a very futuristic date for a baby to be born. It sounds like a real sci-fi kind of date.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like just in the environmental aspect, I know that we focus on like global climate change and all the environmental impact of plastics and things like this. But if you look back, in history, even in like London, back during the Industrial Revolution, I understand that the air quality was so poor that you really couldn't see anything through it, but it's improved quite a bit. And so I mean, it doesn't all seem to be like a negative direction. You kind of see some things in terms of like the use of pesticides and kind of lead pipes, lead paint, lead and gasoline. I mean, there's been, I think it's kind of like a mixture of both. Maybe our sensitivity has gone up and just the scale and scope of civilization's gone up. But the same token, we've also taken steps to kind of mediate that. And I was just wondering, kind of like what's your view in terms of how all that's playing out?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and obviously absolutely true. I mean, if there's one thing we're not short of in cities around here, it's museums that take you back to the Victorian era or the Industrial Revolution and plunge you into an immersive experience covered in smog and people shouting from back streets, and yeah, sort of environmentally definitely on that kind of scale, as well as sort of disease and all of the those other kind of negative aspects that come with the pollution. Definitely we've improved from that point. I like actually that you're framing things in this way, because I don't tend to be all doom and gloom. That's not usually my outlook. I do like to be a realist as much as possible, but at the same time I'm not somebody. I'm also, I like to think that I'm somewhat informed, but I'm also not an expert on climate change or what have you. But I do like to focus on positives and negatives of all situations. So yeah, I think your point is completely valid. And as much as there are very worrying environmental issues at hand, there's also a lot of improvement. Even things like factory farming. Obviously, that is having, and meat in general consumption, and what has to be done to meet that kind of demand, that's clearly very, very damaging to the planet, not to mention ethically, well, some aspects of it kind of horrendous. You know, at the same time, what about all the technological innovations and all the things that we're doing for, more plant-based eating, or, they're often from these dire situations, innovation is born, isn't it? Which is actually hopeful for the future generations.
Yeah, indeed. But I guess, just sticking with the environmental thing, what do you think the world's going to be like when your child has a child in terms of the environment?
Wow, interesting. Who knows? I think it's really difficult to say, because I guess it all hinges on the kind of ecosystemic balances and things like this, I guess. Because isn't it the case that we're in quite fragile times? I don't know. That's what I've sort of been led to believe. So for all we know, I don't know if there's a real disturbance in terms of the bees, or certain plants, the ice caps, all these kinds of aspects of the sort of global ecosystem. If those really come under threat, I guess it all hangs in the balance. It could go one way or another. I'd find it very difficult to predict, but I can imagine that actually by that point, some serious measures might have had to be taken, some serious steps to try and prevent disaster. So it could all look quite good. It could all look really positive. At the same time, I mean, things could become quite dire, which is difficult, but still doesn't seem like a reason not to procreate to me. So
I know I actually have two children. One's graduated from college, and the other one's in college right now. It's kind of interesting. But one observation I've had is there's never a good time to have a child, which means there's never a bad time either, or there's never a better time. Maybe that's
yes.
Well, I guess just thinking about electric cars and autonomous vehicles. Do you think your child will learn to drive?
This is a very interesting question. So I just passed my driving test myself about 2 weeks ago. And so I didn't learn when I was, a late teenager or in my 20s. I only started learning quite recently. I didn't really need to drive beforehand. And it's been quite a struggle. You probably drive an automatic, being in the States. Whenever I've been in the States, people have always driven automatics and talked about manuals as stick shifts and what have you. But here, obviously, most people drive a manual. So it's been interesting. And then when people have said, oh, so the main problem you've had is hill starts, they said, well, of course, in an automatic, you won't stall on a hill and all this kind of thing. And I thought, why on earth didn't I just learn in an automatic? But then obviously, well, I've passed my test and, mastered the manual to a degree, so it's fine. But I did start thinking, well, it's not going to be that long until electric cars become compulsory. I'm not sure what it is in, how these things stand in other countries, but at least in the UK, I think by 2030, manual cars and, petrol cars will be obsolete, perhaps. I think there's a real enforcement of electric vehicles. Even in London at the moment, I believe there's a tax on, non-electric vehicles. It's definitely obviously going in that direction. Whether the UK has the infrastructure to charge these vehicles is kind of an interesting question, because, all right, the prevalence of electric charging points is increasing, but plenty of people live in terraced houses or flats or what have you, and where on earth would they charge these vehicles? I don't know. So I do, again, I'm not an expert in this, but I do see a few flaws in it. It seems just logistically, I think it might be quite challenging. But yeah, on the other hand, am I against electric vehicles? Absolutely not. Anything that, is going to be cleaner for the environment, then great. But they're very expensive, so I think they're going to have to become a bit more affordable, I think, in that space of time, because they're very, very pricey. And then did you also mention driverless vehicles?
Yes.
That's the territory where I'm really a bit more skeptical. I really don't like the idea of a machine sort of taking the onus for our lives. I think, again, I think machine learning and general machine control is quite flawed, even just in terms of kind of algorithms which are used for profiling and identification. They often have real kind of racist biases or sexist biases. So if in that kind of nuance they're flawed, then surely in the nuances of driving a vehicle, they could also be flawed and maybe be quite dangerous. So I'm a little bit apprehensive about that.
Yeah, I think any system where you can't take it apart and see how it works and understand, what's going on is kind of scary. And aside from AI, we seem to be surrounded by more and more of such systems.
Yeah, definitely. I also think it's very scary. And I feel like it could just get totally out of hand. As we've learned from many, I suppose in some ways, fulfilling prophecies about machines, just from sci-fi novels, sci-fi films. I know they're all fiction, but sometimes there's real truth in them. I don't really see how we could then teach a machine to unlearn something. I don't know. It all seems very scary.
Well, I think the scary part is when people stop questioning the machine. They're like, oh, it says we can't give you the loan. Don't know why, but we're going to do what it says, that type of thing. Yeah, as opposed to, I have a job, I paid all my bills, I have a house, that.
Exactly. As just an example, I mean, even in this documentary I saw recently, two people applied for the same sort of loan as an experiment, and they had exactly the same profiles. It's just that one was a woman and was actually only entitled to a lot less, because there was some kind of inherent sexism in the machine. And yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people, especially talking about future generations, my child's child, maybe for them there'll be even less of an impetus to kind of question the machine, because they'll have grown up at all times around technology ruling everything. It is really scary, but what do? You can't really escape it. It's sort of everywhere.
I know, it's like, you carry around the phone all the time. It has your calendar. It buzzes, tells you what to do at that moment. Right now, we're putting the things on the calendar, but once you've developed that behavior, it doesn't matter who really puts the things. I mean, at some point, people will just do whatever their phone's telling them to do.
You're right. And actually, sometimes I might be interested in an event somewhere, or something like this, and it just populates into my calendar. Why it's like sort of auto populates, and then I'm sort of reminded. I'm like, what? I don't remember scheduling
You're like,
this.
did I commit to somebody that I was going there? Will I be meeting somebody there? Am I hosting it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you a few questions about NASA's plans to send astronauts back to the moon. I
Yeah.
guess first of all, the last time we sent people to the moon was 1972. And so this would be over 50 years since the last time people actually have been to the moon. I was wondering if you had heard of it.
The plan.
Yeah.
Yes, I had heard of it, but not in any great detail, and I've not really heard much of it mentioned. Actually, it doesn't seem to have featured very prominently in any discussions I've been privy to, particularly. I don't know why that is.
I have a theory. I'd like to get your take on it.
Okay, yes.
So I have a theory that there's been a lot of plans related to space that have not materialized, and people um, are kind of like thinking, well, whenever you actually do something, then let's talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, I get you. So there could be a bit of that sort of face saving or something.
Yeah, but what do you think about sending astronauts to the moon? But is it something that you find exciting, or are you like, is it misguided? What's your thoughts?
Well, to be quite honest, maybe I'm just being sort of cynical and jaded, but I'm really not that interested in it in of itself. I think planetary exploration, astronomical feats, um, all of that whole sphere, I think is very exciting, and something that particularly interested me as a child, but still does. Kind of maybe more the astrophysics side or have you. And then when you talk to astrophysicists about dark matter and all of these various things that they're researching, I think all that stuff's great. But just for the sake of putting boots on the moon, I think, well, it's already been done. Is there much need to do it again? And perhaps those resources could be better channeled elsewhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that share that point of view. But I'm kind of wondering, do you see a point in our future where humans aren't only on the Earth, but we're also in other places in the solar system as well? That maybe we have people on the moon, on Mars, in orbital cities that are just circling about aimlessly.
Sure, I think that could definitely happen. Again, if literature is anything to go by, it does seem as though it might be something that we're headed towards, especially as the Earth's so overpopulated, and there's not really much that we can do about that. Just to be really cynical, I guess, maybe it won't really get to that point, especially with the increase in kind of global pandemics like COVID. I think actually we were quite lucky to have got away with, a zoonotic virus like COVID, which, although it's been exceedingly serious, it could have been actually a lot worse and actually wiped out a vast proportion of the Earth. Next time, maybe we wouldn't be so lucky and it would actually wipe a lot of people out, in which case there wouldn't be a need to expand onto different planets. Sorry, that's probably such a kind of morbid thought, but I guess we just can't predict. But if we carry on as we are doing, sort of thriving in some ways, at least humanity rather than the Earth, then yeah, I think we'll definitely have to move to other planets. But that does sound like a lot of work, a lot of quick technological advancement. Sounds very expensive as well.
Well, you talk about population growth and pandemics potentially being offsetting thing, but there's another kind of trend, and that's the declining birth rate. Generations in the past used to have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 children. I mean, I only had 2, so that's just enough to make up for myself and my wife. I know a lot of people who have 1, and a lot of people who have none. And if
Yeah.
you look at the trend overall, I think the birth rate is just under 2. So, it seems like we actually might have a declining population instead of an increasing one.
Interesting. Yeah. That's not the case in all countries, though, is it?
Well, that's true. There are
Is it?
countries like in Africa and Latin America and India and where it's less. But I mean, China had a one-child policy for decades as well. So they really kind of encouraged declining birth rate, at least there.
Yeah, definitely. They're definitely factors to consider. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, I'm obviously having a child. I can't imagine I would maybe have another one after, but I can't imagine having 3. Probably not going to happen. We'll see. But yeah, exactly. You're right, definitely. And I know plenty of people who Obviously, this is just anecdotal, but I know plenty of people who don't intend to have children at all. Yeah, you're definitely right. So, but then a lot of people are surviving, and we do have an aging population as well, don't we? Of course. So, all very interesting factors to consider.
It'd be like one of those fantasy or science fiction stories where it's like a society of all these people that are like 200, 300 years old, and then a child gets born and nobody knows how to change a diaper.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering if there's like something other than need that might propel us to go and explore and spread out. So just the sense of, that the Earth is like so small and such a, a speck in terms of the entire cosmos. And, like some, backwards island kingdom in the middle of the Pacific who thinks that island is the entire world, and then they discover that there's, there's Europe and the Americas and Africa and all this, and they just can't believe it, or that their little island has everything they need. I think we would all find that to be kind of a peculiar type of situation. But in reality, if you look at the universe, our entire world's even smaller compared to the universe than that island is to the globe, but yet we seem content.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. On that kind of macrocosmic level, I guess we are pretty insignificant and in many ways content with being so, which doesn't make too much sense given the kind of analogy you've just drawn. So yeah, I think there would be plenty of people who would maybe relish the opportunity to explore. But the problem is when we also say we as kind of an Earth population, there's so much kind of inequality. It's not really that whoever is actually going on these expeditions is necessarily representative of the rest of the Earth, well, the rest of the Earth's humanity. So whilst that's an interesting point, I guess it would really depend on who was going, unless it was some sort of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory golden ticket scenario. That might be an interesting way to do it. But again, that would be quite an odd globalized thing to do. So I don't know if it would be more of a, well, it was like the space race. I don't know, will this end up being a kind of nation, internation race or rivalry or something? I don't know, that could get a bit messy. I wonder how it would work, and if it were really appealing and exciting to expand in that way, wouldn't it just be, as I say, those who are sort of privileged enough to go, and then would those who are privileged enough to go want to go? Because I think a lot of people like to wield power over others, and if those others are not there, what are they really going to get out of it? I don't know. This is all a really interesting kind of topic. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts yourself on whether this might happen or how?
Well, have you heard of Elon Musk?
Yeah.
Are you aware that he has a space company?
Yes, I mean, I've heard of this, but again, I don't know too much.
So one reason why going to space is so expensive is that we use rockets only one time. So he's working on creating this completely reusable spacecraft that could be used hundreds of times, and you only pay for the fuel, which dramatically reduced the cost. He's also talking about using it for point-to-point Earth travel. So you could go from, from the UK to Shanghai in like 30 minutes, as an example, which would be quite extraordinary. But you could use it, go to orbit, go to the moon, go to Mars. And his vision is actually to build enough of these that you could get enough people and material to Mars to build a self-sustaining city. And kind of the timelines that he's talked about, it's like maybe 1 million people on Mars by 2050. And it looks like he has the resources and the commitment. So my fingers crossed. I think it might actually happen.
Right, so you'd be in favor?
I would be in favor. I mean, I think, if the universe isn't out there for us to explore, why is it there?
I get you. I think I'm less. I think I'm less kind of aligned to that way of thinking. Although I'm definitely not opposed, but I just wonder if, again, some of these resources wouldn't be better spent on, the serious problems that we have currently. But at the same time, I don't know. Yeah, it could all be interesting. It just all sounds very expensive to me. But yeah, if all the sort of resources are there to kind of get it kick-started, then yeah, we'll see. I think there's nothing that we could probably do to stop it anyway. I see what you mean about the whole universe being out there to explore. Yeah, I think I neither object nor am particularly in favor. But it's definitely intriguing. I'm definitely interested to know what will happen.
It's like some type of sporting event that everybody's excited about, but you're like, I'm not really into that sport, but that looks interesting.
That's it. It's a lot like that, yeah.
But let's say it was safe and affordable to take a trip to space. Would you
Okay.
consider taking one?
Yes.
And how far would you consider going? To orbit, to the moon? Would you maybe immigrate to Mars if it turned out to be, kind of like a nice place?
Yeah, sure. I don't see why not. It seems a bit barren, but I suppose if there were things sort of cultivated and yeah, potentially. Maybe not full on sort of emigration, but I would definitely visit, I think. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, definitely. Well, okay, let's say that one of your descendants actually did immigrate to Mars, and your great 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 grandchild has grown up on Mars her entire life. She's in high school, uh, in history class, and they're writing a paper on the 2020s. Is there anything that you'd like to share about our time that you think would be good to put in that paper?
Wow. Well, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, the 2020s. Yeah, so we're not too far into them. Well, obviously you'd have to discuss, the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, and what else? I feel very unprepared for this
Oh,
for this
sorry.
question. No, it's good. I think there's a lot that's being achieved in the world, especially in terms of, trying to address equalities and, mutual respect and actual sort of human dignity on a kind of global level, which I think is quite particular to our current times. This doesn't mean that it doesn't get out of hand, but I do think that that's particularly notable. Whether or not it's done in the right way at all times, I do think there is at least a sort of, at least in the West, quite a concerted effort to try to redress the balance and kind of tackle problems with kind of, well, from history and kind of make reparation and, ensure that things don't sort of happen again. At the same time, there's the current situation with Russia, which is kind of in direct kind of contradistinction to that. So I think like any era in history, it's one full of kind of conflicting ideas. But those might be some things to discuss. And then I guess in this history paper, my descendant would also be contextualizing our times within the sort of wider sort of time period. So I guess we'd also maybe be viewing the 2020s as, I don't know, the lead up to electric cars becoming, ubiquitous, or the lead up to this amazing journey to the moon, which I don't know is somehow more revolutionary than the last one, or I don't know. Who's to say? Sorry, that probably wasn't the most exciting response.
Well, I think it reflects how confusing time is whenever we live through it. You know, we look back at history and it's sort of all nicely sorted out and has nice little headers and this was important, but it's really messy whenever you live through it day by day.
It is messy, and the enduring lens through which we see a time period is usually dictated by a specific group or a specific narrative. It's like if we look at the Renaissance, people always consider it a time of the rebirth of the principles of classical antiquity. Yes, that's true, but it's a lot more than that too. Or people always look at, the fact that certain architectural principles were kind of revived and all of this. Yes, all of that's true, but then Renaissance humanism has been presented as something very secular because that's just the way historians have wanted to view it. So then the Renaissance, or the European, Renaissance, especially in Italy, people view as something very secular, and humanism as a term has now come to mean something very secular. But the reality is there was a huge kind of religious current. There was all kinds of spiritual Christian revival and all kinds of things like this. It wasn't just the secular texts which were being revived, but yet that's the view that we have of the Renaissance. So who knows, the 2020s, there could be all kinds of things going on, but how it will be viewed and the kind of narrative that will be constructed around it will just be dictated by, I don't know who, some kind of group with certain agenda. I don't know. Again, I think I've come off, I think I'm being very kind of cynical in this whole thing, but yeah, it's really fascinating to think about. I wouldn't be thinking about these things if we weren't having this discussion. It's really interesting.
Yeah, you could pretty much use current time to make any kind of story that you want. I'm kind of reminded of the opening passage of Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it's the worst of times.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Well, that's it. I mean, I really enjoyed, all of the lockdowns and that we had. I mean, I think there was a real kind of global trend. But yeah, I mean, they were really like challenging times, but at the same time, there was so much good that came out of them, just to take that as an example. So yeah, definitely agree with you.
Well, Claudia, I really appreciate your time. And I know we covered a lot of topics. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about or any questions you had for me?
I don't think so. There's a lot of food for thought there. Probably on concluding this, I'll go away and reflect a little. Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's also kind of the reason, because things change so quickly and in such a sort of almost imperceptible way if you don't make any record of them. That's why I'm really impressed with sort of what you're doing and making records. And that's also why I'm doing sort of a baby book, for my own child, so that, at least a few personal things will all be recorded, when the child is sort of an adult and wants to look back and think, oh, right, wow, you were doing that. Or I don't know, oh, right, you just passed your driving test while you were pregnant with me and it was a manual car that took fuel, weird, or something. I don't know.
It could explode and catch fire. Why'd you take
Yeah,
such risk?
yeah. Crazy. But no, thank you very much for having me on. I hope some of my ramblings were remotely interesting.
Indeed. Well, and thanks again, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Nathan.
Bye-bye.